When we talk about the founding leaders of America, the bright images of great figures like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and James Madison come to mind. These were the individuals who laid the foundation of a new nation, declared independence, and presented the dream of democracy to the world. But behind this shining history, there are truths that have been ignored, hidden, or avoided. Most of these leaders spoke about equality, freedom, and human rights. Yet, many of them were these slave owners themselves. They proclaimed that all men are created equal, but excluded black slaves, women, Native American tribes, and the poor from this equality. The constitution they wrote granted power only to wealthy white landowning men. The public who fought the war for independence later suffered economic crises, heavy taxes, and exploitation. This untold story not only reveals historical mistakes but also shows how power, self-interest, and ideology can differ greatly. We need to understand these aspects so that we don't just idolize heroes but comprehend history fully and truthfully. When America's founding leaders began the movement for independence, their slogans passionately emphasized justice, equality, and human rights. They declared that all men are created equal and that every individual has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. However, when we compare these claims with reality, a stark contradiction emerges. For example, Thomas Jefferson, who wrote those famous words, owned hundreds of slaves himself. His lifestyle, plantation production, and personal wealth were all built on slavery. Similarly, many other founding leaders were either slave owners or supporters of the institution of slavery. They dreamed of freedom, but this freedom was meant only for their own class. Wealthy, white, land-owning men. Black slaves, women, and Native American tribes were excluded from these slogans. Their exploitation continued, and even the new constitution made no clear provision for their rights. This truth reveals how deep personal interests lay behind the freedom movement. Alongside the founding leaders in the struggle for American independence were women, black slaves, and Native American tribes who also sacrificed their lives and played significant roles in the movement. Women not only supported from behind the battle lines, but also strengthened the revolution by secretly carrying messages, providing food, clothing, and medical aid. Many black slaves fought in the war with hopes of earning their freedom, and some even sided with the British hoping to be freed. Native American tribes tried to influence various fronts. However, after the war, all these groups were pushed to the margins of history. Women were denied the right to vote and political participation. Black slaves were not freed but were further chained by slavery, and native tribes were dispossessed of their lands and brought to the brink of destruction. Their sacrifices were not recognized, nor were their rights constitutionally acknowledged. This denial is not just an injustice of history, but a symbol of collective failure. The founding leaders of America raised slogans of freedom and equality, but practically they laid the foundation for a system that primarily protected the interests of wealthy, land-owning white men. The slogans of freedom were for those who already held wealth and power, while the poor, women, black slaves, and Native American tribes were completely excluded from this system. The early American Constitution granted voting rights only to men who owned land or whose financial status surpassed a certain threshold. This meant governance was concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy individuals. These individuals not only gained political power but also held full control over economic resources and legislation. This wealthy class created tax and financial policies to protect their own interests, which imposed a heavier burden on the common people. Poor farmers, laborers, and former soldiers struggled under heavy taxes and debts, while the wealthy landowners increased their fortunes. This established an exploitative system where the idea of true democracy was nothing more than a dream. Furthermore, this class system bred social injustices. The poor and deprived classes were not only denied political rights, but had no system to hear or address their issues. This caused unrest, sorrow over injustice, and anger, which manifested in revolts and protests. The rule of the wealthy weakened the true meaning of freedom slogans. Although they promised freedom, this promise was limited to their own class. This truth reminds us that for democracy and freedom to succeed, all classes must be given equal rights and opportunities. When America gained independence, it emerged with a new beginning but also faced a severe financial crisis. The colonial states had taken heavy loans to win the war, mostly from France, Holland, and other European countries. Additionally, the Continental Congress printed currency to cover war expenses, which soon lost its value. As a result, after the war ended, America was on the brink of economic bankruptcy. The national treasury was almost empty, and the government had no effective tax collection system. Creditors began demanding repayment, but the states could not pay. Consequently, heavy taxes were imposed on farmers, small business owners, and war veterans. These financial troubles caused intense public unrest, which culminated in the 1786 Shays Rebellion, when hundreds of farmers in Massachusetts revolted. They demanded debt relief and tax reductions. Although the rebellion was crushed quickly, it alerted the ruling class that if economic problems were not addressed, the newly formed state would become weak. This led the founding leaders to quickly attempt to establish a strong central government and financial system, underpinned by debt and class interests. Throughout history, rebellions have symbolized resistance against public anger and injustice. When people are deprived of their rights, subjected to oppression, or unable to tolerate ruling class injustices, their feelings turn into rebellion. This was also the situation in early America. Although slogans of freedom were raised, many groups were excluded from this freedom, especially poor farmers, former soldiers, slaves, women, and Native American tribes faced social and economic injustices. Heavy taxes were imposed on them, their lands and rights were taken away, and they were excluded from political processes. This created widespread public dissatisfaction and anger. The 1786 Shays Rebellion in Massachusetts was a major manifestation of this public anger. Farmers and former soldiers took up arms against the government because they were crushed under debts, heavy taxes, and injustices. Their demands included relief from financial hardships, debt forgiveness, and an end to government oppression. Though this rebellion was forcibly suppressed, it warned the ruling class that ignoring public problems could threaten state security. These rebellions and public anger remind us that if governments and societies do not care for everyone's welfare, chances of rebellion and instability increase. True democracy becomes strong only when every individual's voice is heard and rights protected. Rebellions are not just part of history, but teach us even today that without justice and equality, no society can endure. In 1787, when America's founding leaders gathered in Philadelphia to draft a new constitution, they claimed to be establishing a global example of democracy, justice, and equality. This constitution included principles of popular sovereignty, personal freedom, and rule of law. But behind this great document were contradictions that preserved division and injustice in American society for centuries. The most notable contradiction was between the claim that all men are created equal and the continued existence of slavery. The Constitution not only failed to abolish slavery, but protected it. Under the Three-Fifths Compromise, slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person to increase the political power of white voters, not to grant rights to slaves. Similarly, women had no political or legal rights and were considered fully under men's control. Native American tribes were declared foreign nations and denied their rights. Though the Constitution's spirit was based on popular rule, in practice it was limited to wealthy white landowning men. The poor, blacks, women, and minorities were excluded from representation. This contradiction became the first wound in American history, deepening over time. It reminds us that if the foundation of any nation is not based on truth and equality, its democratic structure will always be unstable. America's founding leaders dreamed of a great freedom, a country where every individual would have equality, liberty, and justice. They fought the war of independence to raise a voice against oppression and tyranny. This dream was built on a beautiful slogan: all men are created equal. But this dream was incomplete and remained unfinished. Among the millions who participated in the war for independence, many were excluded from this dream itself. Black slaves who sacrificed their lives remained chained in slavery. Women who supported in homes and behind the battle lines were denied their rights. Native American tribes who sacrificed their lands and cultures were pushed aside from the path of the country's progress. This incomplete dream reveals that the principles of freedom and equality were only for some, while others were considered inferior. As a result, a society emerged that from its very beginning suffered from internal contradictions and injustices. Even today, this incomplete dream reminds us that true freedom is possible only when everyone is given equal rights. This is the lesson we must learn from these untold stories of the past to build a better and more just future. The untold story of America's founding leaders not only teaches us a lesson in history, but also serves as a warning. It shows that behind every great nation are complexities and contradictions. Along with slogans of freedom, personal interests, social injustices, and violations of rights are also realities. We should not view history only as a tale of heroes, but understand it in its full truth so that we can build a better and fairer society where every human being has equal rights. If we learn from the mistakes of our past, only then can we brighten our future. So let us share this truth, raise questions, and walk the path of change. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.